Hey everybody, Dan here. I'm here to teach you everything about the amazing hobby of worm composting. So, and I've got my bucket full of shredded cardboard. So let's move to the next ingredient, food waste. So let's talk about what kind of foods you should and should not compost. You've probably already seen lots of things saying no meat, no dairy. That's true, because those things will stink really bad when they start rotting. I also do not compost fruit. Simply put, I want to be able to do this in the house and completely odorless for temperature reasons. We'll get into that in a little bit. So what I use is anything but. So as you'll see from my other videos, I use a lot of bread. You'll see this bucket. You see a big chunk of rice there. We drink coffee, so there's always coffee grounds. Any vegetable scraps, of course, but no fruit. Just not worth the fruit flies and the smell that accompanies. I do actually take my fruit waste and just throw it out in the yard. So my kids and everybody know what foods they can throw in this scrap bucket. I keep it right here into the sink. It doesn't smell. And this is about 5 days worth. So we do a lot of cooking at home, so you might not get this much waste. That's okay. Just whatever you have. The worm population will adjust to however much food you produce. So let's take these two, let's go into the worm room, and we'll pick it up from there. Hey folks, okay, we're in the worm room. This is where we keep the worms right here, and we keep them uncovered. So before we get into feeding the worms, let's talk about the worm system a little bit. So I studied and did a lot of, watched a lot of videos like this one, trying to understand what it was that I needed to do this. What would be the simplest thing? And after some trial and error, and having the worm bin located different places, I figured out some do's and don'ts. So I have seen a number of people, friends and people online, who were getting into it at the same time I was, and they have since got out of it because it didn't work, it smelled bad. They ended up without ever getting any significant worm population, and just ended up throwing it all out and giving up. And it took a lot of research to figure out what was really needed. But I have, back up James, but I have figured out essentially there's 3 types of systems. One is the continuous flow, which is what I have. It's open in the top and the bottom, and the waste just continuously flows through. This has been filled now for 2 years and has not been emptied. It just keeps going. And the second way is any type of solid container. Basically any type of tub, bucket, where you put the food in, there's a solid bottom, and at some point you pull everything back out and you separate the worms from the castings. And the third way is popular, which is creating levels. Tubs, trays, buckets, that you continuously flip as you go. Now those I want to start with first. Layers do not work. They just do not work. There's tons and tons of people online, people in videos, selling these layered systems. You can go on Amazon, you can buy a system for like $100 that gives you 2 or 3 trays, and it just does not work. And let me explain why. Because the worms will follow the water. That's the whole ball game. So what you want to do is you want to keep it wet in the top half and keep it dry as you go down. Well, the way these systems are, you'll water and then you'll put the worms in, and then you'll put another tray on top of that with holes in the bottom, and you'll put more food waste in there. And the idea being that when the worms run out of food, they'll start migrating up through the holes. And this is all really just a way to try and get the worms to self-segregate so that you're not picking worms out of castings. It's a lot to do about the fact that, just like with the solid bin, if you have a solid tub and it's full of worms and castings and you want to harvest your castings, again, you have to find a way to get those worms to segregate themselves. And I've seen people that put bright lights on the tub to get the worms to move down away from the light. There's lots of ways, and none of them are good. But going back to why the trays don't work, because when you water, the water flows downward and it'll always end up in the bottom. That is just simple physics. And so the worms will always chase the water. So the worms will always be in the bottom. Then you have a tray of food sitting there and it's going to smell. It's going to be just horrible smelling. The whole idea is that the worm bin not smell bad. As I stand here, I smell no odor other than a little bit of that dirt, that forest smell, like you smell when you're out you're taking a walk in the forest. So I don't want any rotten food smell. Any system that involves you putting food in a tray and letting worms migrate to it over the course of months is going to smell so bad you wouldn't even want it on your property, much less in your house. Those are just a gimmick. Those are just an absolute gimmick to sell you a few plastic trays that cost them $3 to make for $120. So that system is just no good. So anybody trying to sell you one of those systems also does not want to actually help anybody to do this. The solid tub I already mentioned, it's a fine way to do it. You'll find people with dozens, maybe hundreds of tubs of some sort or another, and then they have some kind of massive, not always massive, but some type of piece of equipment, a vibrating screen, a series of screens, all that kind of stuff, to separate the worms from the castings. So they'll weed out any undigested waste, and then they'll weed out the castings, and they'll weed out the worms. But that creates a whole nother step that is just completely unnecessary. If you simply go with the continuous flow design, you won't ever have to separate worms, and you won't ever have these water issues. And I'm going to teach you exactly how to avoid having those water issues, where all the water goes to the bottom, so all the worms are in the bottom. In fact, if there's too much water down here, all the worms are going to come down here and they're going to start falling out into this tray. So we don't want that. So the best way to do this is to simply get a little fan like this one blowing on the bottom all the time. So you're continuously drying from the bottom up, and then you're going to water from the top down. So you're going to keep the top nice and moist, and then the worms will live to about here and up. So the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to harvest about 4 inches of castings. And so I'll be right back and we'll get into that. All right, folks, time to harvest. I do this every couple of weeks. Get up under here like so, and get in between these slats with the drill. So I'm going to go ahead and do this until I got about half a tray or so, and I'll see you in a little bit and we'll pick it up from there. All right, folks, let me just sweep up what fell on the floor. Oh, that's beautiful. So when you want to know how much castings do I harvest at once, I just simply let the bin tell me that. Once you get up past all the dry and you get to the past all the dry stuff and it starts coming out moist, and that's when you'll stop, because anywhere there's moisture there's going to be worms. So as soon as I start feeling this stuff is nice and moist, that's where I stop. I'm going to pull this out, let you take a closer look at it, and man, there's a lot of nice castings in there. Look at that chunk. So you may be sitting here saying, well, I watched other videos and they didn't have all this undigested paper and other things. Here's a piece of a corn on the cob. There's a little piece of a peat egg carton tray, undigested. And there's a reason for that, a very good reason. If I left this thing in there 3 times as long, they would digest it down to absolutely nothing but worm castings. But worms will continue to eat their own waste and continue eating their own waste. So if you get to that point where there's nothing but pure castings, you've wasted a lot of production. And what that means is you've got more undigested food sitting on top. You don't have any place to put it, so it starts smelling. You want to get the stuff through the bin as quickly as possible. So for me, from start to finish, this thing goes out in about 2 months. So it also goes to, how do I deal with the castings? Again, a lot of people focus on separation, separating the castings, the pure castings out. The only reason you would want to do that is if you were actually trying to sell the castings, which, let me clue you in, you're not making $100,000 a year doing this unless you're doing it as a huge commercial venture, and I do mean huge. I've seen the videos online showing you a 5-gallon bucket and telling you can make $100,000 a year. Yeah, if you had 1,000 of those buckets. But for most of us, all we want to do is take care of our own waste and do for our own property. So you don't really need to separate out the castings, because all you're really trying to do is enrich your soil. You're really just trying to create good potting soil enriched with worm castings. So let's go back out to the garage and I'll show you exactly how I do just that. Alright folks, we're back in the garage. We've got our waste product ready to go. You probably notice I use these tiny cat buckets. We have 2 cats, so I have an endless supply of these buckets. So you're going to have some kind of source of 5-gallon buckets. Round ones obviously work fine. So what you want to do is you want to take the bucket, you want to drill about 4 1/4-inch holes in the top. That'll keep the moisture in, but allow it to get oxygen. And it'll make for just a really nice way to store these and to continue composting them. First, before I show you this, I want to talk about something that you've probably heard of by now. They call worm tea. A lot of people think, just like I went in thinking, hey, these devices, everything I see shows a lot of liquid coming out the bottom and people collecting that liquid and selling that worm tea. Well, yeah, but let me explain what worm tea is. Worm tea is a scam. Okay? Worm tea is taking, now this is my watering bucket that I use. Worm tea is filling up, usually they'll use some kind of a spray bottle. You know, they might give you maybe a quart or so of water, and then dropping that into it, shaking it around till it turns kind of brown color, and charging you $17.95 for it. Now, where I come from, that's known as a scam. And there is no situation where that product is worth really anything. If it's what they call oxygenated worm tea like this, where they add finished castings to the water, it's just highly diluted worm castings. And what's even worse is when they get it out of the nasty brown liquid that's leaking out of the worm setup, and that is actually anaerobic and horrible. I mean, it's got bacteria in it, but you know, so does a lot of things. So either way, I don't do the worm tea. First of all, you shouldn't be producing any worm tea. As you saw in there, there was no place to catch liquid. There was no, some of them will have a spout here, like Kool-Aid. That is, that is a ridiculous idea that you're going to sell that to someone. You shouldn't have excess water like that. All right, here, you can take a second look here, and you can see that that is starting to dissolve and turning a bit of a color. So again, to me, it's just a scam. It's dishonest. It's not worth anything. And again, if I had my system leaking any kind of liquid, it would not be in my house. Which, by the way, this is going to be in your house. Worms like to be between 68 and 70 degrees. And they can go as low as around 55 or as high as like 80 before they'll die. But essentially, these things need air conditioning. They need to be in a very specific temperature range. So anything that you're doing has to involve temperature control. Again, I've seen so many people who say nothing's working, Dan, they're not reproducing, and they got them in a hot garage. Now, I'll get off my soapbox and I'll show you how I do these. All right, well, first let's start out, let's look over here at one of these. This was my last one. Now, it's late fall, so I just emptied every bucket of this I have out in the yard and in the garden. So I'm replenishing. Over the winter, I hope to fill about 10 of these back up, ready for spring planting. So what I do is I put them in these buckets and I add water and I add some clay and I basically create the soil, and then I turn this about once a month. So I'll come out, I'll take one bucket and I'll just turn it over into the other bucket by doing this. And it's really what I do for fun. It's relaxing. I can break up any clumps that I find. Here's a nice clump of castings. And I'll check the water. This stuff is really pretty good and moist. I'm going to add probably a little bit of water to it. There we go. This stuff just smells amazing. If you love the smell of a forest, this is the way to do this. I absolutely love the smell of dirt. So I'm just going to take this. So again, this is a month old, and I can see that it's continuously breaking down these softer pieces, like the pieces of corn cob. They're starting to get softer. Everything feels really good. So I'm just going to add this to it. No sifting, no sorting. Nothing fancy. And I'll just keep doing this until this thing, I like to give it at least 2 inches for oxygen. So, as you can see, it's just exactly what goes in the top. They'll usually digest the food quickly, so what's left is all your browns. Which in this case is like, this is a piece of a corn husk. There's a little piece of peat that hasn't gotten digested. And of course, paper. I stopped putting paper towels in here, napkins and things like that, because they don't digest. So I'm starting to become convinced that paper towels are actually made out of plastic or something. If you know anything about that, let me know. All right, then all I'm going to do is I'm going to soak it down real good with water. And the more water, the more activity you're going to have. So you want as much water as you can get without filling the bottom 3 inches with mud. As you can see, there really, wasn't any mud in the bottom of this. So I like to keep it to where you would call that wet, but it's not going to puddle. And I'm going to go ahead and also add some clay to it. Here in Indiana, we have clay. We have hard clay soil. And actually, a lot of people don't like Indiana clay, and it's for a lot of wrong reasons. Yes, it is hard to get certain things to grow in Indiana clay. Non-natives sometimes don't deal well with the clay. So that's why, I plant a lot of cedar trees. They love the clay. A lot of things love the clay, and the reason is simple. Clay retains moisture. It is very, very drought tolerant. So it makes a great additive. The particles are very, very tiny, and that's what causes it to become clay. So it's a great additive because it'll continue to hold that moisture and create a great soil. So I'm going to probably just put in about 1 inch of clay here. Sometimes when I'm bored or I'm on the phone with a client, I'll just come out here and I'll just play in the clay, and I'll just break up the little chunks in the clay so you get nice broken up powdery. Okay, now I don't have to do this, but I'm just going to come through and mix it. Now you can wear gloves, you could do this with implements if you want to, but for me, getting in the soil is a big part of the fun. So that'll go probably another month and get stirred again. And as I said, come spring, I'll be putting this out in the garden. What I like to do is I like to just scatter seeds in my beds and then come along and just cover them with a light layer of this. No tillage, no effort. And this year I'm going to try to go all Indiana native plants so we can get a lot of birds, bees, butterflies, all that kind of stuff. So with that, the only thing left is to feed the bin. I'm anxious to show you how to do that and how to do it odor-free. So I'll meet you back inside. Okay everybody, we're back inside where the worm bin is and we're ready to feed it. So the first thing that occurs to me when I come in, I'm touching this is wet to the touch. And I like to keep it wet. I will come in just about every day. I will give it a quick touch, and if it doesn't feel nice and wet, I'll go ahead and soak it down real good. And I think that this is a fundamental problem with a lot of people that have worm bins. They want to control moisture. They don't want any water to get to the bottom area of the worm bin because then the worms will follow. And so I see them and they really want it to just be barely moist, and the worms hate that. And I think that's one of the reasons that you'll see people doing that, and they'll have 15 or 20 of these setups because they're not getting very good production out of any of them. So I want you to first come over here and take a look. And I'm going to pull this back and I want you to see what the worms are doing. See how they're squirming and they're happy? Now I put in 3 to 5 inches of, I don't know if you can see those very well. There's lots of worms there. I don't know if you can see them very well. There you go. So I put in 3 to 5 inches of shredded paper on top of the food. That keeps the smell down because it creates that wet barrier like this. So as I pull this back, I want to expose about down to where the worms are at and where the food is at. So I just want to leave about 1 inch of the paper and then add the food on top of that and then put the paper back over top of it. So what I'll do is I'll dump out here and I push it over to this side. Can you see right here from there, James?
Oh, right here? Oh, okay. Yeah. It's like
so
clumps.
The reason I'm doing this is because I learned a long time ago the worms don't really like to be in the center of this thing. The worms love to live around the outside, especially in the corners. So rather than fighting with them, I just put the food where they like to be. So I'm going to go ahead and just dump the food in like so. And you can see I've got some whole tomatoes there. I've even got a couple of slices of pizza. Pepperoni. Now you may be wondering, what the heck's up with that? Well, cooked pepperoni pizza really won't rot. It won't smell bad. And the worms will eat it before a pepperoni or any salted meat will actually start to rot. But for the most part, and you can come over here and take a closer look. I've got some tomatoes that didn't get eaten, lettuce, and coffee grounds, and rice, and some bread. And that is actually, oh, that's a big chunk of refried beans that didn't get eaten, and a couple of marshmallows. A lot of times you'll find popcorn. All this is stuff that composts well and doesn't give you an odor. Like I said, the fruit flies are not worth the fruit. So I don't put any fruit in this. And again, there really is no way to have a system like that and not have it be indoors. Some people like a closet. That's fine, but it limits your room to work. But inside is the way to go. Now, right now, I can smell just a little bit of a rotting smell because the food that's been sitting under my sink has already started to go bad. But it's not bad at all. Kind of has a little bit of a tire smell. So I am going to just cover this back up with the shredded paper. And this shredded paper, as you can see, hopefully you can see, it's got a lot of worms squiggling around in it. And again, Anywhere there's water, the worms will follow. And I like to go ahead and push it down like so, because I left a big space in the bottom, and it doesn't hurt a thing to just give it a little squish down. Lastly, I'll take my shredded paper and I will completely fill the bin as tall as it can go with the shredded paper. Because the thicker the shredded paper, the more it's going to cover up the smell. Now, I see a lot of folks put a lid on it. Bad idea. The reason that they put the lid on is to keep the worms from getting out. But when you put the lid on, the lid starts to get condensation on the bottom and around the sides, and that's why the worms start coming out and sticking to the underside of the lid, because they're following the moisture. If there's no moisture, they won't try to come out. So, get this nice and squished down. So this paper is going to hold a lot of moisture, so I'm going to come in and thoroughly water for probably about the next 5 days. And so again, depending on how long the food's been sitting under the sink, this may have an odor. If it does, I will simply open the window in here for half a day and air it out, or use air freshener, or both. So that's it, folks. I want to encourage you to comment, ask questions, subscribe and all that, but I will tell you, this is not about clicks and subscribers. This is about helping people actually achieve simply having a worm composting setup in their house, and have it not be a huge fight between mom and dad and something that smells so bad you got to keep it in the garage. So with that, I'll sign off. Thank you very much for your patronage, and we appreciate you. Say bye, James.
Bye. Bye. Wait, so what do I do for the end screen? I guess I'll do,